The world knew Marlon Brando as Hollywood's rebellious king. But in 1955, he did something so shocking that Queen Elizabeth herself signed the order, a 10-year ban from an entire country. Not because of a film role, not because of politics, because of one night in a London hotel room that descended into absolute chaos. Flying furniture through windows, graffiti covering the Victorian wallpaper, and Marlon Brando, completely naked, wandering the lobby as if he owned the place. When the report reached Buckingham Palace, the Queen's reaction was immediate and ruthless. But what no one talks about is what really happened in that room before the destruction began. Because Brando wasn't just drunk and wild that night. He was running from something much darker, and London was where it all blew up. Don't miss this story, and be among the first to get similar content by subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications. March 1955 was the peak of Marlon Brando's triumphs. He had just won another Oscar for On the Waterfront, and the 30-year-old actor was no longer just a star, but a full-fledged phenomenon. He was the creator of a new acting style called method acting that turned Hollywood upside down. He delivered such realistic performances in Elia Kazan's films that critics called him a living miracle. But Kazan's concern about Brando was lurking somewhere deep inside. The director realized his actor was losing the line between himself and his characters. Just 3 weeks before the Oscar ceremony, he told his close friends that this situation would one day destroy Brando. And in London, in that suite on the 4th floor of that luxury hotel, Kazan's fears would become reality. Brando hadn't actually come to London alone. He was accompanied by his assistant, Alice Marchak, the woman who would be the most stable figure in Brando's life for 30 years. Alice would later describe that trip to London as the starting point in interviews. The actor hadn't slept at all on the plane. He just stared out the window and talked to himself. When Alice asked him what was wrong, his answer horrified her. Brando said Stanley Kowalski still lived inside his head. He couldn't kill that character. Stanley Kowalski was the character in the film A Streetcar Named Desire that launched Brando's career. And apparently, that character refused to leave Brando's mind. Claridge's hotel was London's most prestigious accommodation. It was a place that hosted guests of the royal family, with works of art hanging on its walls and crystal chandeliers lighting its lobby. Brando arrived here on the evening of March 15th at 20 to 11 local time. The receptionist, George Ainsworth, would never forget that night. The actor seemed very calm, but his eyes were strangely empty. It was as if he wasn't there. He was looking at Brando, but not seeing him. When the receptionist noticed his hand trembling as he signed the registration form and asked if he was okay, Brando smiled at him. He always said he was fine. Years later, when George recounted that moment, he still emphasized one detail. Brando knew his name, even though he wasn't wearing a name tag. Brando's third-floor suite had one of the most beautiful views in London. Hyde Park was visible from the windows, and the room was furnished with Victorian furniture. After settling Brando into his room, Alice went to the room next door. It was midnight when there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, she saw Marlon. He was wearing pajamas, but his feet were bare and his hair was disheveled. He mentioned he couldn't sleep. He said the walls were talking. Alice let him in and tried to calm him down. Brando told her about a technique he had learned during his method acting training. Lee Strasberg, his teacher at the actor's studio, would make them do emotional memory work. He would want them to relive traumatic moments from their past, feel the pain of those moments, and then transfer that pain into their performances. That night, in the dark room, Brando confessed his greatest fear to Alice. He explained that once a door was opened, it could not be closed. He said the pain never went away, it only grew. Alice took him back to his room and gave him a mild sleeping pill to help him sleep. But at 7 in the morning, housekeeping staff member Beatrice Holloway heard a strange sound in the hallway. It was coming from Brando's room. She knocked lightly on the door, but there was no answer. The sound continued from inside. It sounded like a human voice, but the words were unintelligible. When Beatrice opened the door with her key, the scene she saw shocked her. Brando was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, with 15 or 20 empty whiskey bottles in front of him. The room was a mess, but it hadn't been vandalized yet. Brando looked at her and smiled. He said he was sorry, that he had had a little to drink but would clean up. Beatrice backed away and spent several minutes thinking about what to do before informing the manager. In the end, she decided to do nothing, because Marlon Brando was the world's most famous actor, and maybe he was just having a bad night. At 9 p.m. on the evening of March 16th, Brando came down to the lobby. He was wearing a tuxedo and his hair was carefully combed. When George at the reception desk looked at him, he saw a completely different person. When he said the actor looked great, Marlon winked at him and said it was all part of the show, that they were all acting. Then he went outside and got into a taxi. No one knew where he was going, but when he returned at midnight, the tuxedo was gone. Instead, he was wearing a torn t-shirt and jeans, and he had 3 bottles of whiskey with him. Alice woke up at 6 in the morning to the sound of banging on her door. It was Brando. When the woman ran to open the door, she was frightened by the look on Marlon's face. There was panic in his eyes. He was gasping for breath and his hands were shaking. He said he had killed him. He said he had killed Stanley, but that he was still there, in his head. According to Brando, the character was looking at him and laughing. Alice tried to calm him down, but Brando was out of control. He was shouting that Lee Strasberg told them to get inside the character, but didn't teach them how to get out. He kept repeating that there was no way out. Then he went back to his own room. Before Alice could close the door, she looked into Marlon's room. And what she saw froze her. The furniture had been moved. The Victorian chairs were overturned. The antique table was broken. But the worst part was the walls. Brando had written something on them, with a black pen. There were words, but Alice couldn't read them because Marlon slammed the door. At that moment, Alice Marchak made a decision. She would alert the hotel, but then she heard a noise from inside, the sound of glass breaking, then a scream, Brando's scream, and then silence. It was 7:10 when Jonathan Ashford, the manager of Claridge's hotel, received an urgent call. Something had fallen from the 4th floor, from the window. When Jonathan ran upstairs, 5 or 6 staff members had gathered in front of Brando's room door in the corridor. No one dared to go inside. Jonathan unlocked the door and froze at the sight before him. The room was completely trashed. The window was open and the curtains fluttered in the wind. Most of the furniture was gone, probably thrown out the window. The walls were covered in graffiti and writing. Brando's writing was too messy to read, but some words could be made out. Stanley, Kazan, salvation is gone. Characters never die. And in the middle, on the floor, among the broken glass, sat Marlon Brando. He had an empty whiskey bottle in his hand, and his head was in his hands. Jonathan approached him and asked if he was okay. Marlon lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot, and there were tear stains on his face. He gave the manager a harsh reply. Of course he wasn't okay. But he added that the manager wasn't okay either, that none of them were okay. He was explaining that they were all acting. Jonathan was playing the role of the hotel manager, and he was playing the role of the famous actor. But they didn't know who they really were. Then he stood up, and Jonathan realized at that moment that Brando wasn't wearing anything. He was completely naked. Jonathan asked the actor in a trembling voice to please put something on. Brando laughed. It was a bitter laugh. He asked why. He said this wasn't a costume either. He was explaining that the body was also a costume, that everything was fake. Then he walked towards the door. Jonathan tried to stop him, but Brando gently pushed him aside and stepped out into the corridor. The staff recoiled in horror. Alice rushed out of her room and tried to stop Marlon, but he didn't even hear her. He headed for the stairs and began to descend, naked, drunk, and completely out of control. At 7 a.m, the Claridge's hotel lobby was relatively quiet. A few early rising guests were waiting for breakfast. An elderly English couple, an American businessman, and 2 French tourists. That's when Marlon Brando came down the stairs, completely naked, his hair disheveled, his eyes half closed, and he was mumbling something. It was Terry Malloy's famous line from On the Waterfront. But Brando wasn't saying it like Terry. He was saying it with the ferocity of Stanley Kowalski. I wish I could be someone. I wish I could be someone, he repeated. The guests in the lobby froze in shock. The elderly English woman screamed and hid behind her husband. The American businessman held his newspaper to his face. The French tourists reached for their cameras, but receptionist George stopped them, and Brando stood in the middle of the lobby, barefoot on the marble floor under the crystal chandeliers. He called out loudly to everyone. He asked if everyone had seen him, but if they had really seen him. He asked if they saw Marlon Brando, or if they wanted to see Stanley Kowalski or Terry Malloy. He wondered which character was being portrayed today. Then he laughed, and that laugh was so bitter that years later, George would say his hair still stood on end when he recounted that moment. Jonathan Ashford descended into the lobby with 2 security guards. They approached Brando with careful steps. The manager asked the actor to please go upstairs. Marlon looked at him and shook his head. He said the play was over, the curtain had fallen, the applause had stopped. It was time to return to reality. But he asked the manager what reality was. Then he allowed the security guards to wrap him up. He was wrapped in a blanket and taken upstairs to his room. The guests watched in shock and silence, and nothing would ever be the same again in the 100-year history of the Claridge's Hotel. On the afternoon of March 17th, exactly 24 hours after the incident, a large meeting was taking place at Buckingham Palace. Sir Anthony Pemberton, one of Queen Elizabeth's special advisors, sat at the table with the official damage report from Claridge's Hotel in his hands. The report was detailed. Broken furniture, damaged walls, items thrown out of windows. The total damage exceeded £3,000, an astronomical figure for 1955. But it wasn't just the damage that bothered Sir Anthony. It was the upset guests, The elderly Englishwoman screaming in the lobby was the wife of Lord Winchester, a member of the House of Lords. And Lord Winchester had called the palace directly that morning and asked how the Queen's prestigious hotel could have opened its doors to such hooligans. Sir Anthony forwarded the report to the Queen's private secretary, Sir Michael Adine, and Michael had a private meeting with Queen Elizabeth that afternoon. The details of the meeting were never fully disclosed, but Sir Michael would later tell his friends, Her Majesty was very clear. She said this man had shown disrespect to England. He had been disrespectful to a place where the royal family was being hosted, and he had upset British citizens. She had emphasised that there had to be consequences. The Queen was angry but controlled. It was a principled decision, not an emotional one. On March 18th, the official letter reached Brando's agency in Los Angeles. Its content was simple but devastating. Mr. Marlon Brando was banned from entering the United Kingdom for 10 years. This decision was made with the approval of the Foreign Office and the Royal Palace. There was no right of appeal. The agency was shocked. Banning an actor from an entire country was unprecedented in Hollywood history, and 10 years was a period that covered the most productive time of Brando's career. British producers, London film festivals, European tours, all cancelled. Brando's initial reaction was anger. He called his agency and asked who these people were, who could ban him. But his agency explained the seriousness of the situation to him. This was more than a hotel issue. It was the Queen's personal order, and it was an order that had to be obeyed. Brando hung up the phone and didn't speak to anyone for days. According to Alice, those days were a turning point in Marlon's life. He didn't accept the ban, but he internalized it. He knew it was his own fault, but he couldn't accept it. So he shifted the blame elsewhere, to the British, to the monarchy, to the system. On the 25th of March, Brando spoke to the press for the first time. When an American journalist asked him about the London incident, Marlon's answer went down in Hollywood history. He said the British didn't like him because he was free, but they weren't. He explained that he lived acting while they watched it. He emphasized that he pushed boundaries while they lived within them. He claimed it was real, but they claimed it was a relationship. He argued that this was why they banned him. He said they couldn't handle the truth. The press put these words on the front pages. Headlines read, "Brando says the British are afraid of freedom." But the truth was something else entirely. Alice Marchak finally told the truth in an interview in 1987. Marlon was lying that day. He was lying to himself. It wasn't about freedom. It was about control. Marlon had lost control. Alcohol had taken hold of him. Method acting was destroying him. He had lived the character of Stanley Kowalski so deeply that he could no longer find his own personality. The man throwing furniture out of windows in London, writing on walls, walking around naked in the lobby, was not Marlon Brando. He was Stanley. Or maybe they had become one and the same. Marlon knew this, but he couldn't accept it. So he blamed the British. He took the easy way out. The 10-year ban lasted until 1965. During this time, Brando's career continued, but something had changed. Producers began to see him as unreliable. Rumours spread that he caused problems on set, refused to memorize his lines, and fought with directors. And his alcohol consumption increased. He both starred in and directed the 1960 film One-Eyed Jacks. But the shoot was a disaster. Brando didn't show up on set for days. When he did, he was drunk. The film's budget tripled and it flopped at the box office. Paramount Studios never cast Brando again. But in 1972, everything changed. Francis Ford Coppola insisted on Brando for the role of Vito Corleone in The Godfather. The studio refused. They said the actor was crazy, unreliable, and had no market value. But Coppola insisted that he was the greatest actor in American cinema, and that if they didn't cast him, he wouldn't make the film. Eventually, the studio agreed, and Brando gave such a performance that he won his second Oscar. But he didn't go to accept the award. Instead, he sent a Native American woman named Sachin Littlefeather to protest Hollywood's injustice towards Native Americans. This move made him iconic once again, rebellious, principled, living by his own rules. In 1975, the ban ended and Brando was able to return to England. But he never did. In an interview, he said they needed him, but he didn't need them. In reality, he was afraid to return to London, because London was like a mirror to him. It reminded him of the control he lost at the Claridge's Hotel in 1955, of becoming one with Stanley Kowalski, of method acting beginning to destroy him. London was where reality was, and Brando was truly running away. Marlon Brando died in 2004. He was 80 years old, obese, sick, and alone. But when he died, the newspapers remembered him as the greatest actor who ever lived. The father of method acting, the architect of modern acting. Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, and Jack Nicholson followed him. They all embraced the acting style Brando created. But none of them paid the price Brando paid, because Brando lived his characters so deeply that he couldn't kill them off. Stanley always stayed with him. Terry Malloy was always there. Vito Corleone never left. And eventually, the real Marlon Brando disappeared. The London ban is a little known but critical part of Brando's legacy. Because what happened at the Claridge's Hotel that night was not just a scandal. It was the first sign of a collapse. It was the moment the dark side of method acting was revealed. Lee Strasberg's teaching of getting inside the character meant losing himself for Brando. And the 10-year ban was a 10-year reminder for Hollywood's greatest genius. He had lost control. He had lost his truth. He was no longer himself. Today, as a new generation of actors learns method acting, Brando's name is written in gold letters. But no one tells them about London. They don't tell them about the furniture flying out of windows. They don't tell them about the man walking around naked in the lobby, shouting, "Who's the real Marlon?" They don't tell them about the 10-year ban signed by the Queen. Because this story is not a success story. It is a tragedy. It is the story of the world's greatest actor losing himself. And perhaps the most painful proof that this is the price of true art.